Hey, Christine Faulkner, Sacramento and Elk Grove's living trust and estate lawyer with Cava&Faulkner. Thanks for tuning into another edition of The Daily with Christine. Today we're talking about LLCs, a few things you might want to know about them. So if you stay tuned until the end, you're going to learn what is an LLC, how is an LLC taxed, what are some of the things you need to consider when deciding which state to create your LLC, and why an LLC versus perhaps another business entity. So first, what is an LLC? An LLC is a limited liability company. Many people form LLCs because they want to have a business entity. They want to have some asset protection so that their personal assets are sheltered from any liability from the conduct of the business. So last night I was at my son's house, who is looking to form an LLC, and we encountered a number of questions that he and his young friends and roommates had about business formation. One of the questions was, well, what is an LLC and why do people form them? And there are a number of reasons. One is asset protection. Another is to choose your taxation. So one of the great things about a limited liability company is that you can choose how you're taxed. You can actually be taxed as an individual. You can be taxed as a partnership or a corporation without the structure and formalities required within a corporation itself, such as you don't have to issue shares. You can have a very flexible management requirement, which is outlined in the operating agreement. So here's how an LLC works real quickly. An LLC works to shield or protect the owners and their personal assets in this way. So you have a business doing business here in California, and you have, let's say, some money inside of the business. You own a home and you have retirement accounts and other types of investments in your personal life. Your business gets sued and there is a judgment entered against your business for some amount of money. The great thing about an LLC is that what the creditor, meaning the person who gets the judgment against you, what they get is what's called a charging order. They can't come in and break up your company and raid your company and take everything you have, which could be disastrous, right? If you had a large judgment against you and your creditor was able to just come in and basically take what you have, even if the judgment is more than what you own, they'd be able to take everything and dismantle your company. Well, the great thing about an LLC is that your creditor gets what's called a charging order, which means that they don't have a right to break up your company. However, when you make a distribution as a member of the LLC, they do have a right to attach that distribution. So it definitely gives you great protection to keep your company running, to stay in business with your existing partners or the other members of your LLC. And it allows you to stay in business without a creditor breaking up your company and taking everything that you have. So that's kind of the quick and dirty on how an LLC works. California is not a great asset protection state. And so one of the things that we were talking about last night with my son was, well, what do you have to do to start an LLC here in California? And is California the right venue? So all you have to do to start an LLC is to file your articles of organization. You have to choose a name. You can go on to the Secretary of State website and get all of this information. I believe that there is a database of names, so if the name is already taken, you'll have to pick something else. And of course, you fill out your articles of organization, you pay the fee. and you submit this to the Secretary of State and wait whatever period of time it takes for them to record this information. And once that has been done, you have a going concern. You have your LLC. One of the things that we talked about last night was, well, how is an LLC taxed? And I'm not just talking on the federal level, but the state level. So in California, there is a minimum required tax of $800 a year. My son and his friend had no idea that there was a minimum required tax. So that means even if you create an entity, you create an LLC and you don't make any money, you still have to pay that $800 every year. And that is due 4 months after you create your business entity. So you don't have to pay it up front, but you do have to pay it 4 months later. So that might be a real downside to some people. Obviously, this is a state tax. This is the equivalent of your state income tax, but state tax at the entity level. The next question was, well, maybe it's better for us to create this LLC somewhere else. So we looked at or talked briefly about the fact that places like Nevada, Wyoming, Delaware, Alaska have far better asset protection laws within their state, and maybe you want to create an entity in another state that has more significant asset protection. One of the downsides to doing that is you have to have a registered agent in that state to accept process. What does that mean? It means that any business entity has to have an agent willing to accept process if they're sued. So if you create an entity in another state, you'll likely have to pay someone to be your registered agent in that state in order to maintain the entity. And here in California, you will have to register your foreign LLC, your LLC in another state as a foreign LLC here in California. One of the things we learned last night, because my son and his friend are considering moving to Texas, we looked at, what is it to be, how do you create an LLC in Texas, and is that maybe a better deal? And creating an LLC in Texas, because they have no state income tax, could actually be more lucrative or favorable, because there's a reduced amount of taxation. They don't have that minimum required tax, but in fact, there's a higher filing fee up front to create an LLC, but they have a much smaller minimum tax. And in Texas, multi-member LLCs by law are treated as partnerships. So many differences between different states and how and where you should form your LLC, and you have many considerations as to why. Finally, I wanted to say that having a business entity is probably an important thing if you're going to be doing business. Clearly deciding the venue, the tax consequences, both federal and state taxes, is a very individual choice, and looking at the different venues or different places where you can create an LLC and the ramifications from a tax perspective and asset protection perspective are different, as well as the costs. So I wanted to share that personal story of our research last night and how it can be a highly personal decision on just where you'll create your LLC, how it will be created, and why you might make those decisions. So just going to Legalzoom and creating an entity can be fraught with unforeseen consequences unless you do your due diligence beforehand. A little insight into just a few of the considerations that go into deciding where and how to create your business entity. I'm going to do a little series on LLCs, so stay tuned to my next video where we'll talk about what an operating agreement is, what the LLC members are, and what everything, what all goes into creating a membership agreement and or operating agreement in your LLC. what kinds of things are put into that, and why you might want to consider including certain provisions. Thanks for tuning in. Like our videos if you like our content, subscribe to the channel, and would love to make videos on anything you're interested in hearing about. Take care. Bye-bye.